Welcome back to episode 7, everyone, and we're moving now into part 2, which is all about converting between data types. So let's head on in to SQL Server Management Studio. Alright then, let's change the database quickly. Back into Wide World Importers, and we're ready to go. So first up, we have the isNull function. Now this is a very handy function that I use regularly in my work writing SQL code, and all it does is simply check the column, or as you can see I've got a sum going on there. It checks that, and if the column is resulting in a value, it will return that value. Otherwise, if it's a null, then it will return this default value here. So the isNull function, we start with isNull. As you can see, we need an expression, and this is the expression here, which can be a column, could be a mathematical equation. Here we've got the sum function in there. So all we're doing is getting the sum of the extended price, group on the order ID, and of course if that's null, then we want what's known as a replacement value. So we put a comma, and then we put our replacement value. So every time there's a null here, we want to put a 0 in its place. So we're just using a very standard select statement that you've seen millions of times so far in previous episodes. We're left joining the orders to the invoices, and as we know, some orders are not shipped, so there will be no invoices for those. So we're probably likely to get a lot of nulls when we look at the extended price. That's on the invoice lines table. We're just looking at the year 2016, hence the filter. Let's run that off and see what we get. There you go, the ordered ID. So we've got an invoiced amount, and seeing as we have that invoiced amount, you can see the isNull function returns that amount exactly. But as we scroll down, you can see when we start hitting nulls, we normally do, because there's no invoices for these 4 orders here, we instead put a 0 in, which is the value we specified here. Now, thing to note with the isNull is it will take the data type of any column in this in the expression here. So as you can see, this is to 2 decimal places, so then the 0 is to 2 decimal places as well. So that's what it uses for the data type. So if we hover over that, you see that's a decimal. We can't then put, for example, A in there, because it'll just not work, because it can't convert your decimal with a character string there. But as you can see, we put an integer, but we can convert an integer into a decimal quite easy. So we need to make sure that our replacement value is of a workable data type compared to the expression itself. That's one thing to remember with that one. Now we can also put in another column there, or another sum function, for example, or we can even put a mathematical equation. So for instance, we want to say if there is no invoice line value, maybe we want to put in the quantity times the unit price instead. So we can just simply put quantity times unit price. Oh, we've got a divide in there. Quantity times unit price, and we're going to sum that up because everything's summed up. It's only grouped on the order ID. So if there's no extended price, then we're going to put the quantity times the unit price instead. So as you can see, you could build in some complex sort of functionality within your else now statement there. Run that off. You can see that it's the same. The ordered amount was the same. As we go down, you can see we're not returning 0 anymore. We're returning the actual ordered amount, quantity times the unit price. So there's quite a bit of flexibility for you in the isNull. You can even embed isNulls within isNulls. Starting to really get quite complex there, but you've just got to remember the amount of brackets that you're using. So forever, whichever open brackets you have, how many you've got there, you need to make sure you have the same amount of closed brackets as well, and it could get quite tricky. But straight and easy, quite a common practice is to return a 0 against a null value. Pretty straightforward, pretty straight easy. So let's move on to a little scenario that I've prepared for you here to test your knowledge of the isNull and how to build those. Right then, scenario is the customer service manager wants to complete the final order tally for 2015, but needs to know the correct order number for each order during the year. So you need to provide her with the following information. Got the customer name, the back order ID if there is one, or the order ID and the order date of the original order ID. I think you can give that a try. If you want to give it a go, then pause the video, and when you're ready, we'll go over the answer from my perspective. Right then, so we're looking for the customer name, so that'll probably come from the customers table, as we've done many times before. Let's drag that one in there, and we want the customer name. There we go, for each customer during the year of 2015. So final order tally. So we're looking at orders. Sales orders, here we go. If I can get there. Customer ID. Customer ID. Happy days. And we need to make sure it's for 2015. So we can then put a where clause, or we can do an and within the join itself. Order date equals 2015. Let's put the year function on that. And we're good to go there. So let's have a very quick look at the orders table. Let's get that data very quickly. That's a quick win for us there, of the original order ID. So let's have a look at the orders table and find out what's going on with this second block of code that we requested. So we've got an order ID there, and when we move along, we've got a back order ID. So what happens here is that if an order can't be fulfilled, then it's put on back order, and then eventually the system will update itself when the order does get sorted out and shipped, and we'll have a back order ID put into there. If we go down to 45, you see that doesn't have a back order ID, because at some point this was invoiced out, the back order was cleared. So we know that although this was the original order, number 1, it was actually shipped out on back order ID 45. You can see the customer ID is 832, salesperson 832, 832 and 2. So it's effectively exactly the same order. Here's the customer's purchase order number, and it's exactly the same there. So in fact, order ID 1 isn't an actual order that's been invoiced, it's simply just the original order, and order number 45 is where it was actually invoiced on. So what we need to do is put in the back order ID, if there is one. So in this case here, put in 45. If not, we then put in the order ID. So in this case, there's no backward order ID, so we put in order ID 4, and we're going to do that with the good old is now. Is now back order ID, otherwise we put in the order ID. We're just going to call it order ID, so that will simply put in the back order ID. If that's a no, it'll put in the order ID there. So let's run off that code and see what we get. There you go, there you have it in 2015. So we've only got back order or the order IDs in there with our customer name and the order date. Brilliant stuff. That's the is now, where we're dealing with two situations effectively. So if this column here or formula or what have you is blank, then or is now, then we simply put a replacement value in there. And that's all there is to it with the is now. Now, what if we need to check more than one column or one scenario for now? Say could have 3 or 4 different scenarios where we need to check. If it's not now, then we return the value, or if it's now, then move on and check the next scenario. Well, that's where we come in with the coalesce function. Again, another handy function that I use now and again. No, not as much as the is now function, because the is now is very quick, very efficient. All it's doing is one check, this one or that one. If it's now, boom, returns the value. So it's a very quick, very efficient function. Coalesce, on the other hand, is slightly more complex. It does more passes on the code, on the column, a few more checks, so it can be slightly slower. But in certain situations, it will really work a treat. So with the coalesce function, all I'm going to do here is simply build up some scenarios with a few CTEs. Now the first one, based on orders, is simply selecting the ordered amount, which is based on the order lines, the quantity times the unit price, like we've seen before. And we're just going to look at these 4 orders here. The second one, invoices, pretty much exactly the same thing, but this time we're looking at the invoice and the invoices lines, which is again the quantity and the unit price. So we've got our ordered amounts, totals per order ID, invoiced amount totaled per order ID as well. Again, for these 4 orders here. Now we don't know at this stage whether these 4 orders actually have invoices, but if they don't, then that's fine, because the scenarios we look at will cover these instances. And lastly, I'm putting in a cancelled CTE. For example, if the customer phones up and he says, I need to cancel these orders or this amount on these orders here or if maybe he needs to return a product once he's got his orders and he decides actually this doesn't fit or it doesn't like it anymore and he wants to return it. So I've put in an arbitrary amount of $100 against these two orders here, which as you can see are those two there. So we've got pretty much three different groups of values to work with. Some of orders, some of invoices, and a couple of cancelled amounts in there. So that's all those CTEs are for, and then the select statement itself brings it all in. And because we don't know if we've got values in all of these, then we simply do left joins to bring us a lot of lovely nulls going in there. So what we're trying to get is the order ID, ordered amount, invoiced amount, and cancelled amount. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take the ordered amount, we're going to take off the invoiced amount, and then we're going to take off the cancelled amount, and that should be the amount that we have outstanding on those orders. So this will be the amount that we are waiting to ship off to the customer. But this is broken here, and I'll show you exactly why. We'll comment out those bits of code there, and we'll run off the select statement here. Don't forget the CTEs, or that certainly will not work. So here you go. We've got an ordered amount, which is fine because an order has to have an ordered amount. However, here these first two orders have not been invoiced, nothing's been shipped, so we've got nulls in there. And for the next two, they have been shipped, so that's fine. We've got values, invoiced values there. Now for these two orders here, we've got cancelled amounts, but we haven't got cancelled amounts here and here for these two orders. So once we've done our mathematical equation here, simply that, minus that, we expect to have 62160 here, but we actually end up with null. And that is because as soon as one of these values within our mathematical formula is a null, then the whole thing effectively becomes a null, because SQL Server doesn't know how to compute that equation if there are unknowns thrown into the mix. So our outstanding amount is broken, or except this one here. That minus that gives you minus 100, because we've got all three values in there. And then again, everything else, because there's at least one null value, we get a null there. So how are we going to fix that then? Well, one method is to use the coalesce. And you simply build it up, taking in your different scenarios. So if we look at the first one, order amount minus invoice amount minus cancelled amount, if we've got those three values, or three of them, then we want to return that value straight away. And in this situation, we have those three values. So that will return that value there. Next, we want to look at the ordered amount minus the invoice amount. So we don't include the cancelled amount there. And we can see ordered amount minus invoiced amount, basically these two here, and we should effectively get 0 in that situation. So that should work, and we'll get a 0 popping up there. Next scenario is ordered amount minus cancelled amount. So here we've got an ordered amount, here we've got a cancelled amount, but no invoice amount. So that minus that should give us our value there. Last but not least, if all else fails, if all of these end up being null, in the case of this one here, where we've got two columns of null, so that will be null, that will end up null, and the third situation will be null. That becomes our default value. So in this case, we should just get 62160 popping up in there. when we fix it with our coalesce. So quite a lot going on in the coalesce function. Let's run it off quickly and see how we go. There you have it. Even though we've got nulls in all of these bits and pieces here, we have got the results we're expecting within the coalesce. So in this situation, for example, it's done this one, it returned a null. It's done this one, returns a null. This one returned a null. And lastly, as our default catch-all type scenario, we then put in the ordered amount, which you can see there. In this situation, obviously this is the ordered amount minus the cancelled amount. So when it reached this one here, it returned a value 1196, so that's what it gave in our result set. This one, as we saw before, had all three, so our first scenario worked just fine, and then once it returns a value, it doesn't bother going through the rest. And then we have our ordered amount, an invoiced amount, no cancelled amount, so scenario 3 was fulfilled. And that minus that gives us a 0. So that's quite an in-depth analysis of what's going on with our coalesce function. One key thing to note with coalesce is that you need to ensure you get your scenarios that you're checking for in the right order. So for example, if I put ordered amount as the first scenario, for example, and I run it off quickly, because every order has got an ordered amount, it will hit that first and return it straight on. So as you can see, we're just returning the ordered amount there, which is not what we're after. That doesn't give us our outstanding amount, that is purely our ordered amount. So we can see that it's very important to get these scenarios in the right order. Just think about it logically and build them up. Normally you're looking for the largest scenario first, the most amount of comparisons, we've got 3 in there, put that first, and then your final catch-all should be as short and simple as possible. Now these two, doesn't matter about the order of these two, but it's vitally important that we do put this one first and this one last in order for us to get the right values at the end. So that's a lot of code going on and a lot to think about in the coalesce. However, it gives us the flexibility of throwing in multiple scenarios instead of the is now, where you've just got a choice of 2. However, like with most things in SQL, there are hard ways and there's easy ways of doing the same thing. So how do we do this? Using nulls. Well, all we simply do is copy this formula up here, this mathematical formula, and we use the is nulls, checking if the invoice amount, if there is one, return it, take it off from the ordered amount, otherwise take off 0. And again, if there's a cancelled amount, take it off. However, if it's null, then simply return a 0. That will give us exactly the same result. As you can see there, these two are exactly the same. So obviously a lot more simple to use is nulls. And my preference is to use is nulls where you can. It's very simple. As you can see, we've got one line here which simply takes in all these scenarios. We don't even need to think about any scenarios, whereas with the coalesce we really did have to rack our brains to get all these in the right order, whereas your is null is vastly simplified. So that's a very quick run through of the is null and the coalesce functions, how they can be used in different scenarios. So I cannot here put an is null. It will get a bit confused because it only requires 2 arguments. So we need to put a coalesce. However, you can put a coalesce in place of an is now, because it'll just do effectively the same thing, because you're giving it two values there. So that's it. Let's try out our skills then with a slightly more complex example. And the scenario is that one of the company's investors is visiting tomorrow, and all the bigwigs are flapping like mad, trying to put together a presentation on the company's performance since it opened in 2013. Now, the first person to corner you in a corridor is the purchasing manager, who is after some figures. She needs the following. She's after the supplier name, total ordered outers, and the total received outers. But she wants the data split into years 2013, 2014 and 15 added together, and then 2016. So quite a few columns required on this one here. And after all that, she wants a grand total for all the years. So you're basically adding all of these up. Pretty much similar to what we've done here, where we've taken them off each other. Instead, she wants them all added together. So as you can see, this is like a calculator. We put the minus in. You can put different mathematical symbols like plus, multiply, divide, etc. into those. So that's the idea, that's the plan. Now, it's quite a tricky question, quite a tough request to fulfill. So you've gone to the senior data analyst, and he's advising to follow the steps below to build up your select statement. And that's what we're going to do when we go over this request. So step one, simply write a query to extract the supplier ID and total the order outers and received outers per supplier ID, and filter on the expected delivery date being 2013. So we've got a couple of sums in there, group by, and a year on this column field. And then step two is to build a CTE with this statement. Pretty much similar to what we've done up here. Then copy the code, build a second. That sums up 2014 and 2015. And here's a little block of code I've put together for you to do that. It's just that. So instead of putting equals and then the year, you can put an in brackets 2014-15. So that'll add the 2 years together in one. And then build a third CTE using the same code as CTE1, but for 2016. So you've got 3 CTEs to build there. Now step 3 is all about bringing it all together in a final select statement, where you've got the supplier name to come in, and then you left join all the CTEs. And we're left joining because we don't know if all the suppliers bought in all the years, or any of the years. They could have bought in 2013, or they could have supplied us with goods in 2013 and 2016, but not in any of these 2 years, or it could be a variety of both. So we need to left join just in case, otherwise we may end up with no results. So that's what we're going to do, left join all CTEs to the supply name. And then once we've done all that, and we're happy with what we're seeing for the various years in different columns, we then need to do some grand totals, some final totals. So we're going to use the isNow function first of all. As we've seen up here, the isNow slightly easier to use than the coalesce. So let's start off with that one there. Add up all the total hours from all the CTEs, and then do the same for all the total received outers. So that is step 4. Now, if you want to, if you are feeling brave, then you can do the same final total calculations using the coalesce function. as the next step. You should have 6 scenarios to take into consideration. I've had a look and I think I worked them out quite well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the final step to put a 0 in. So there's your 6 scenario. If all of these fail, if all of these return null, then simply put a 0 in. Now you can see I've missed a few permutations, but I've had a look at the data and I think we only need these sort of scenarios, the 0 at the end, and it should work just fine. We'll see how we go. Now, if you want to give this one a go, try it out, follow the steps, and if you want to, if you get stuck on steps 1 to 3 in building the statements to bring in all these scenarios, then just follow me up to the point where I create these and then make sure yours matches, and then we can go on to step 4 and have a look at that. So we'll see how it goes from there. Right then, let's begin with the task. So first thing we have to do, supplier ID, total ordered outers, total received outers. Where are we pulling those from? I think it's from the suppliers, purchasing, supplier transaction, purchase orders. There we go. So we have purchase orders, bring that in as O, and of course in that table we have our supplier ID. However, to get the outers and the received outers, we'll simply inner join purchase order lines. Let's bring those in. Brilliant stuff. Let's get the spelling right. And we're joining with the purchase order ID. So let's bring in those outers. Ordered outers. And we have our received outers. So very simple, very straight function. And we want it for 2015. So let's have a look at the orders. I think it's order date equals 2013. Stick in our year function. We've done all this many times, so I'm sure you did exactly the same thing. And we need to sum these ones up, of course. Copy and paste to make my life easier. As received outers. So let's have a look. Let's see how it goes. Oh, what have we forgotten? That's why we check our code every time. We've forgotten our group by. Not a new query. Let's execute that. And there you go. So, here's our supplier IDs. These are not that many. If we're looking at 12, we assume that 12 is the maximum suppliers we have. As you can see, we've only got 6 there. But we're getting figures for those 6, which is brilliant news. So we then need to put that into a CTE. I'm just going to call it CTE1 as, let's shift that across in line. And there's our first CTE, done and dusted. Right, so that's step 1. Oh, that's the expected delivery date. Let's read the requirement, not the order date. Well done everyone for picking that up, whereas I've missed it completely. So the expected delivery date is in 2013. Excellent. Right, let's bring in the next CTE, which is CTE2, and we're using this bit of code here. All we're going to do is copy and paste that in, and that's it. Put it simply. Let's test that out. You see we've only got 2 suppliers within those 2 years. Last but not least, we're going to bring in CTE3, which is for 2016. Excellent stuff. So we've got a variety of different supplier IDs coming in depending on the different years. So we've fulfilled step 2 now, and we're on to step 3, where we bring it all together in the final select statement. And first up, we need our supplier name. Bring that in there. Supplier name. So we're ready to go, and that should cover all the years. Then all we simply do, not the inner join, we're using the left join, CTE1 on CTE1 dot supplier ID equals s dot supplier ID. There we go. We've got our first one in there. Simply copy that, paste it down there, CTE2 and CTE3, and there we have it. So we've done all our joins. Let's see what else we have to do, and bring in total ordered outers from all CTEs and do the same total received outers. So we've got to build up our columns returning these for the various years. The first one we'll do, CTE1 ordered outers. I'm going to paste that 6 times. That's received outers. And that's 3. Our 3 CTEs. Make sure we've got the received outers. And there we go. We've built up our select statement with our CTEs. Let's run that off. See if it all works. And there we have it. So we've got a lot of nulls creeping in there, which may provide a problem for us when we build in the is null, step 4, and especially step 5 as well. So at this point, if you want to pause the video and correct your code, whatever you went, if you went wrong, and we'll then move on with the is nulls. Alrighty then, good to go, code working fine. Let's push in the is null bit. So all we're doing is simply adding all these outers together. CTE1, CTE2 and CTE3, and we're going to call it total ordered. Now obviously we'll be getting the same column names out of these, so what we want to do is rename these as well. We'll call that 2013, paste that down, received outers, just to differentiate between all the columns. otherwise we won't know what's going on. So make sure we rename those to the correct ones. And then we have our grand total ordered outers. Now obviously when we run this off, you'll see that we get a multitude of nulls creeping in. That's a null when it should be 221. That one's fine. However, they were ordered outers in 2013 of 57. They're not reflected there either. So all we do then is we simply do an is null, like we saw on this first bit here. Is null, comma 0, and that's all we need to do with that one. Put it against all your different ones there. And we'll run it off again and see what we get. And there we go. We're getting grand total ordered outers correctly computing. There's your 57, 1442. Brilliant stuff. So we know that this is working fine. And we can do exactly the same by simply grabbing our code there, paste it in, and we want received outers instead. So very quickly we've built up our code just by copying and pasting, run it off again, and our received outers are just good. See, there's different there because we have a difference in 2016, so we're getting different values there from ordered to received. However, we know our code is working fine now. So that's is now, and there's a lot of nulls in here as well. So what we can do is clean that up by simply putting the is null 0 on all our columns as well. And just simply copy and paste it down. Run it off and you'll see another new query. No thank you. We've got zeros in instead of nulls. Pretty straightforward. So here's all our suppliers, all 13 of them, and quite a few have supplied us with nothing in 4 years, but we've got quite a lot from others there. So that's looking good. We can now send that data on to the purchasing manager, and she'll be happy with all of that. That's the is null version. Did any of you try out the coalesce function? If not, and you're keen to check it out and see how it's done, we'll have a go at that. Coalesce. Here we go. I'm going to put all the different scenarios underneath. So we're looking at this right here. Let's put that in there. CTE1, CTE2 plus CTE3. Where are you? Here we go. And then of course we need to put our columns. Let's line those up nicely. Put in our commas and close off our coalesce. And we need to just make sure that we copy them down. CTE2, you're in there as well. And lastly, CTE3. And we've got to make sure our sixth one is to put a 0 in. So if there are any of these scenarios return nulls, we want to default by putting a 0 in at the end. There you have it. There's your coalesce. Done some weird formatting for you here, just so you can separate it from the rest of the code. That's received. We're going to call that number 2. Right, now let's see what happens when we run that off. I'm going to blank out received for now. And let's run that off. Let's see if it works first of all. Alright, so there's all our columns, etc. So this was using our is nulls, and this is using our coalesce, as you can see, all giving us exactly the same results. So you could have used either function there, the coalesce, or the is null. I'm not going to bother doing this for the received, because it is just replacing this with received outers, and that is very straightforward. The syntax, however, is exactly the same on the coalesce. So you can see, very simple method of doing it with is null, a lot more complex with the coalesce, but you may come across a situation where you simply have to use a coalesce. Maybe the situation is not as complex as we've got it here, but you may use it in place of is null. Is null, of course, a lot more commonly used function. So that's it, everyone. Hope you enjoyed my explanations, and that pretty much wraps up episode 7. Hopefully you're all staying wide awake with my heavenly voice here. So we've covered quite a bit in this episode. String extractions, a lot to do with strings. We looked at is null, coalesce, all sorts, even converting between data types. So once again, quite a lot to take in, but we had a lot more fun and games with the select statement there. And that's it, everyone. I look forward to seeing you in episode 8, where we play around more with the select statement and some more fun and interesting functions to have a look at. Until then, until I see you again in the next video, everyone, I hope you all have a fantastic day.